Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce our next main stage speaker, Major General Jeffrey King, Director of Logistics, Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection, Headquarters, United States Air Force. As a LOA Marymount University alum and Reserve Officer Training Corps distinguished graduate, General King commissioned as an aircraft maintenance officer. His command experience includes commanding the 455th Expeditionary Maintenance Group at Bagram Airfield, the 18th Maintenance Group at Kadena Air Base, the 78th Air Base Wing at Robbins Air Force Base, and the Oklahoma City Air Logistics Center. Please welcome Major General King for his keynote address.
All right. Well, the first time the lights are low, I can actually see you. You guys look great. Hey, it is really awesome to be here with Log Nation talking about contested logistics. If you think about it, we're only halfway through the week, and just about everyone on main stage has addressed contested logistics in one form or another, really from our opening day speaker. And of course, the theme of the conference, logistics deterrence, it makes sense, right? And from General Van Ovost, I love her quote about logistics, being flex without making a fist. That's awesome, right? It's almost as legendary as General Marquez, the jawbone. Damn it, you hear me, the jawbone. But when you make a fist without the muscle, it kind of falls flat, right? And so our job is to make sure that muscle is there, so when we throw that swing, it has impact. And so contested logistics. We've heard from the COCOM perspective, heard from MAGCOM perspective, General Minahan this morning, definitely weaved in. From the organic industrial base perspective just now, from our own General Hawkins, and how we can leverage the OIB to ensure our logistics are not contested along the way. And then yesterday, partners and allies, not only the panel, but Air Commodore Houghton and his eloquent speech in logistics defense as well, deterrence. So here we go. This about 8 months ago when I came to the Pentagon, General Miller said, hey, Jeff, I'd like you to, we've been tasked with standing up a contested logistics OPT. It was one of 5 taskings the A4 received out of the contested logistics TTX. It was a tabletop exercise, very successful one at Corona Fall last year. One of 5 was to stand up this cross-functional OPT and really take a look at the problem holistically. And so he and we sat down and looked at the list of specified tasks and immediately started scratching a few more. And I'll talk a little bit more about the OPT later, but we've seen it from the COCOM, the MAGCOM, other perspectives, and so what I'll do today is relay a little bit the context of how we're looking at it from the HAF perspective and then kind of what we're doing at it. And the overall task of the OPT is to develop data-driven, risk-informed options that the SecF and the Chief can consider funding to close any gaps that the OPT may identify. And that's what we're going to do. We developed 5 lines of effort. We went out and found 5 O6s, the MAGCOMs that most closely aligned with those lines of effort, are leading those. We have representatives across the DAF, across the MAGCOMs, DLA, the medical services to bring in MedLog, and many others. 125 participants in total, steady battle rhythm. I'm not going to talk to the specific recommendations because China's always listening, and this is an open forum. But I think it's instructive to talk about the framework and the considerations because it not only talks to the pacing threat, but as General Hawkins talked about VUCA, there are many, many other threats, and we can be contested in any theater, in any conflict, and the model and the perspectives we're going to look at can be applied everywhere. So I think it should be instructive. And the important thing to note is as we ramp up GPC and the implementation of that, what we're going to do is wind down this Conlog OPT and fold it into A4L activities. Because after all, addressing contested logistics should be reflexive, not a special activity. It shouldn't be a standout. It should be something we do every day. So that will be our task moving forward in the coming weeks. And we're going to loop into other ongoing efforts. The J4 staff has a COLUA, Counter Logistics Under Attack team. HAF A5 Futures has a COLUA team. The Army stood up a contested logistics office in Huntsville, Alabama. They have about 40 people working on this, leading a larger cross-functional team full-time. When we started this, I started a lit review, of course, started with Google, GTS it, right? And I got 5 million hits on contested logistics. And then I hit Kahlua, not Kahlua, filtered those out, and I got another 5 million hits. And so there's a lot of space out there. I started with the lit review, right? So coming from the depot and the OIB and a head full of depot maintenance, getting back into the A4 work, that lit review is important. And there is a lot going on, but it's really important that we don't, especially now, as Air Commodore Houghton pointed out, interoperability is now an operational necessity, and so we've got to move forward as a team of teams. So as we look at the Secretary's AFA speech, he threw down a marker. He said, we got to be ready by 2027, right? And so everyone's saying, hey, now is the time to get the DAF ready. And we logisticians look around and say, holy cow, we got a lot of work to do. And why is that? Because over the last 30 years, we have relentlessly focused on efficiency. We have streamlined our repair networks and supply processes for efficiency to create headroom in constrained budgets for modernization and recapitalization, because we could, right? We could. We had, we weren't countered. We had a non-contested counter BEO environment, but that's not going to be the case. And so now we're going to have to do the sets and reps and really consider what that's going to look like for our supply chain and repair networks, all the way down to our unit of action. In an era of great power competition, we're clearly not going to be able to enjoy that freedom of maneuver that we had in the past. When it's time to break glass, logistics, we can't consider logistics as we've had in the past, as some functional activity. It's not. As we mentioned yesterday, logistics isn't self-serving. It's part of operations. In fact, it's one of the 7 joint operational functions. And we really have to begin to look at logistics, pair logistics. Just as years ago we paired flying hour funding and weapon system sustainment funding, you can't increase one and decrease the other. They have to go together as a pair. So must be modernizing airframes and modernizing sustainment warfighting logistics systems and processes. They must go together. For the longest time, we've modernized one and considered the other foundational. And that's just not the case. One of the 7 functions of joint operations, that's sustainment. So when we look at the challenge in that light, I think we'll better plan, innovate, partner, fund, and drive the changes that we need to counter the threats. Next slide, please. Next slide. So these generals, wartime generals, knew it, and I put a few quotes up there, some you're very, very familiar with. And I would add to them Napoleon, who planned logistics down to the number of wagons of food that he'd need for his war horses. That's supply support. Hannibal, who used elephants to cross the Alps in the Second Punic War, transportation. And we can't forget Alexander the Great, who said, my logisticians are a humorless lot, for they know if my campaign fails, they're the first ones I will slay. Unity of purpose, incentive alignment, right? They understood that logistics was part of operations. So as we stood up the contested logistics OPT, as I said, we do what all good loggies do, and we hit the books, because those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. I dusted off my shelf from the books I got when I was PACAF A4, and I found one called Pacific Express, the critical role of military logistics in World War II. The picture on the lower right there you see, it is of Navy Rear Admiral Richmond Turner and Marine Major General Alexander Vandergrift. And they're planning the Battle of Guadalcanal on the bridge of the USS Macaulay in circa 1942. And the quote that went with that from Admiral Turner says, during the first months of Operation Watchtower, 80% of my time was spent moving from one logistics crisis to another. And in the first 2 weeks, getting the airfield into condition to operate aircraft. Sounds like Back to the Future, right? But I want to point out, these are operational commanders, not loggies. So kind of a big stage setter, but I'd argue part of the position that we're in today is because we haven't considered logistics part of operations. And I know I'm singing to the choir, but you're going to continue to carry the mail, not only in the weeks and months, but years ahead as young logisticians and those more senior and tighter circles. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the logistics conundrum. Those quotes, those wartime commanders, they knew it. And while I wouldn't say that we've enjoyed peace over the last 30 years, I would say that we haven't been, except for episodically, haven't been strained logistically, if you will. And that's arguable, and we're happy to talk about it tonight over a fresca. But we were definitely lulled into a sense of security, at least logistically. And because of that, we've taken a great deal of the risk. And you're all aware of lean principles. I'd argue there's a fine line between lean and malnourished. And that's something that we need to consider moving forward. And so now we find ourselves, once again, planning for a conflict in the Pacific, but we've got this multi-part conundrum. And you're all aware of the peace dividend, the downward pressure on defense budget, the downward pressure on sustainment of defense budgets, the internal campaigns, just-in-time logistics, cost-effective readiness, all those types of things, and logistics being foundational. And what's the result? Things like doing an ICT on 5th-gen aircraft, 4th-gen aircraft with 2nd-gen equipment and 3rd-gen processes, right? Those are things we need to change, and change rapidly. We have the time to prepare for the next war, and this is the time and money implications. But when that war comes, we'll instantly have the money, but not the time, as you all know. And it generally takes 12 to 18 months to procure parts that are in a cold starter where industry isn't producing them. If it requires foundry work, add another 18 months, because as it turns out, there's a national shortage of casting engineers. Who would have thunk it? And there's some great innovations out there. Our folks in the Sustainment Center are working to counter those with things like 3D printers that do sand casting, expanding their foundry to be able to pour parts. We're investing in the organic industrial base. It's fantastic. And so for want of a nail, you all know that phrase as well, right? Turns out we don't get bids on RFPs for 20% of our contracts for legacy aircraft parts, right? So as we think about, as we make recommendations to the Secretary and the Chief on where to invest, where might we invest? Our organic industrial base traditionally has been the shock absorber with the commercial industrial base. Fantastic partners, can't do everything all the time, and we're arguably a post-industrial nation, right? Global, now we have a global supply chain, I'd argue a global workforce, and it's very constrained at times. So we might consider a recommendation in investing in organic manufacturing to help all of those things that General Hawkins just spoke so eloquently about. So if you've read the book Freedom's Forge, you get the notion that our industrial base helped win World War II. We produced 2/3 of all the material used. Are we prepared to do that today? Is our defense industrial base, our commercial industrial base, prepared to do that on the scale and with the speed? And even if we can, do we face the same environment? Do we have the permissibility to get all of that material to the fight as rapidly as we could in World War II? Now, we were contested then, right? Next slide, or not next slide, sorry. We were contested then, and I'll show that in the next slide. So don't get me wrong, it's a wicked problem set, don't get me wrong. We are ready to go to war. We are ready to do what we need to do. We are Americans, we're not Americans. We will find a way, right? We will, that's what we do, and we're loggies. We find a way, we get it done. And with our partners and allies and our industry partners, we're even stronger. That's who we are. But there are arguably some gaps and seams our adversary would seek to exploit, and it's our job to find those and to close them, and thereby complicate the calculus and hopefully move 2027 down the road. That should be the goal. Next slide, please. Okay, so just very quickly here, for those not overly familiar with contested logistics, past and future. In the past, I mean, contested logistics isn't a new concept. We targeted bridges in World War II. Pictured in the kind of the upper right there is the highway of death of Iraq. You know, we attacked supply lines. The Germans attacked ours. They hunted commercial transport ships, shot down our aircraft. They mined the seas as well. They interdicted our supply efforts. And everyone's aware of the massive campaign against their industrial base. That picture of a blown up, lower right, is a picture of a blown up factory in Schweinfurt, right? Turns out it is all ball bearings. But the point is, if you look at Warden's ring theory, it's much more effective for them to go after our systems and our infrastructure than it is to take us mass on mass. And the systems and infrastructure is our organic industrial base and all those underlying processes. So maybe an area we want to make sure we're completely shored up. But if you're studying this, and if you've studied us the way we've studied our adversaries, there are some lessons that could be learned. They've studied the success of our island hopping campaign, so they would seek to deny us that maneuver. They've watched us mass for World War II and more recently the Gulf War. They know that if we achieve our mass, we're kicking some butt. We can't lose. So they would seek to deny us our ability to mass. They watched us form coalitions, strong coalitions of partners and allies. And if we achieve those coalitions, they would seek to deny us those partnerships. They've seen our incredible industrial base, and there's no doubt that they're going to try and disrupt that. They understand our long-standing principle of centralized command and decentralized execution. They no doubt would like to disrupt our decision advantage. So it's a wicked problem set. It's going to take our youngest airmen to our highest ranking general officers, industry, academia. It's going to take the whole of us to get after it. Next slide, please. So this is kind of our approach. Next slide. Thank you. So one of many models we looked at, we went through the joint planning process. We first looked at what's the operational environment. What ability twos do we need to succeed in that environment? What's our present state? And then what objectives and goals and tasks do we need to close that gap in the present state? And we may have listed many, at least from the perception of the teammates and members working on this, perceptions, right? Things to go look at and explore. And as we looked at those, it helps to begin to group them. And you can take a look at them in terms of production capacity, transportation, and I could talk through those through various different lenses, but these will apply in different models and different locations and different challenges. But instead, I'll focus on perhaps ability twos. And when we talk ability twos, the ability to rapidly generate sorties, the ability to connect and share information to achieve decision advantage, right? Systems of systems type things is where we begin to think about ability twos, not efficiency or effectiveness, but efficacy, right? The ability to achieve a desired result. And that's where we get into systems of systems. Factors to consider: capacity. Do we have the capacity we need? Velocity. Can we get the things we need to the right point? And how do we achieve velocity? You can do that by, let's focus to demand. Demand, and working on demand, it affects both capacity and velocity. You can reduce demand for strategic airlift by pre-positioning, right? That's one way, and our partners and allies can help with that. You can reduce demand for strategic airlift. That's for deployment. You can reduce demand during employment for spare parts resupply by reshaping your repair network to have some of those nodes give more repair capability to the field and have some of those repair nodes more proximate to the fight. So you shift it maybe from tactical strategic airlift to tactical airlift. Well, what if we consider the Navy model, where they have floating ships of repair networks that avoid shots and can support many ships in many locations at once? Things to think about. Things to think about when we consider the calculus. How about reducing demand for spare parts altogether by increasing mean time between failure, by leveraging our Aircraft Availability Improvement Program, our AFREPs, and things like that? All things we're looking at through great power competition. And then there's resiliency. Not just the ability to protect what we have, but our ability to fight through it. Face combat losses of people and equipment that we haven't seen since World War II, leverage our partners and allies, and achieve levels of interoperability we haven't seen before. interoperability? How about intraoperability? How about the ability for our airmen, our crew chiefs, per se, our flight line folks, to move from F-15s to F-16s to F-22s to F-35s? Can we use the helping hand at the end of our arm before reaching out to our partners and allies? And I would say that they don't need to be sequential. We need to be able to do that in parallel. Can we leverage our joint and combined exercises to not just train next to each other, but train together, not just with our own aircraft, with our others, but with our partner nation as well. Some things to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of how the DAF is getting after it. Through great power competition initiatives. So let me start first by saying one of the things that I think we'd all agree to is that we have a very fragmented innovation ecosystem for sustainment and warfighting logistics. AFWERX, RSO, the MAGCOMs are getting after some things. The wings are doing some things on their own. Program offices are doing some things. But once something is done, is it done universally across the board? Is common aviation support equipment truly common? Do we have the ability to field things at scale across the board? All challenges that we raised during the GPC efforts. They were heard, understood, and acknowledged, and the Secretary and team, primarily AFMC, has responded. And some of the things we're looking to do is stand up an integrated development office. So once those requirements are received from the MAGCOMs, the integrated development office will begin to take those and come up with common solutions, better interfaces with industry and our organic capacities and capabilities, and have a unified approach to developing solutions and fielding them. The Air Dominant Systems Center, and I'm not going to get too far into the organizations because I'm still learning as we go. That wasn't my particular lane. I'll focus underneath under the Combat Readiness PEO. A PEO focused on readiness to not only bring the operators' requirements in, but the sustainers' requirements as well, for equipment, for parts, for aircraft availability improvement, and all the various things that we've been working on. These things inspire hope. We've seen these gaps for years, and this is an opportunity now to stitch together some gaps in our fabric. And then you get the Product Support Center of Excellence. The product support teams are if the SPO has the acquirers, the product support team, they're the folks that work most closely with us in our depots to work and field and close the gaps and sustain our fleets. This is developing an organization that will be able to support them universally. And so if you're going to change incandescent bulbs to LED on one aircraft and save that level of work and reduce the man hours with that, now they can step that up to the Combat Readiness PEO, who can direct that across the board to everybody. See how this begins to connect? I mean, this should be heartening. And if you're on the flight line going, yeah, I don't get it, King, that's okay, right? Because the folks higher up do, and they're like, holy cow, this is awesome. So my point is, through GPC initiatives, and some of you know me, kind of a Trekkie, Star Wars, Star Trek, all things sci-fi. Innovation is my trade space. The Kobayashi Maru, that Kirk's a cheater, he cheated on the test. I say he's an innovator, right? He went left of bang. He rewrote the code so that the unwinnable test is now winnable. That's what we're doing through these various efforts, GPC, and I'll talk about the Basic Logistics Enterprise and Conlog campaigning. We're not just trying to do the same things over and over, hoping for a different answer. We are investing an incredible amount of time trying to rewrite the code so that the things we do produce a different result, right? So right now, we're trying to fill our war readiness spares kits through a flying hour program that's underfunded and often underflown. So as soon as we get a part into a kit, it goes back out, right? So through the efforts of AFMC and all their supply sprints and many things they've identified, we may soon be able to independently fund our RSPs. So for the aircraft that are most germane to GPC, we can say, we think we're 2 years from a fight. Okay, we want that at 150% of the level so we can signal to industry to go out and produce more so that we have those spares, and if things get destroyed when they're forward deployed, we actually have parts to put out there instead of having a carcass constrained item. destroyed, now we don't even have a part to fix. It gives us flexibility and options, right? Some things to think about. Incredible work being done by AFMC and the larger GPC team. Beyond that, basing a logistics enterprise strategy, this is something we've been working on, crafted in 19, in place since 20. You can see the lines of effort there. This is not new to us. That you can see the COLUA, the conduct of logistics while under attack. We've been marching along this effort very, very well, and now we just strapped a nitrous bottle to it, or JADO bottles, so with the conlog effort. The contested logistics campaigning, there were 5 taskers that came out of that TTX. I won't delve too deeply into them for OPSEC reasons, but you can see generally what the A4, General Miller, was tasked with going to do. Next slide, please. And I will focus specifically on the conlog team. These are the 5 lines of effort that we set. LOE1, decision advantage, and I put the 06s and GS15s up there who are leads, because they're from your MAGCOMs, and this was targeted, right? The decision advantage team, Colonel Chad Ellsworth, Ms. Teresa Moore, A4P, they're the folks who do log IT. You've heard a lot, you know about Blade, many other things. It was a natural home. How about asset mobility? Who better than AMC? They're already driving initiatives. Now we get to up the ante from a MAGCOM priority to a SecAF priority. And by the way, the other things the team identifies, they can go flesh out and make sure that they're credible now with the bench strength and the insight from other MAGCOMs and key players, right? So there was a vision to this, and Tom Doan, just as he retired, handed off to Darryl Longyear and done some absolutely incredible work, expanding, coming up with some new potential ideas for aerial ports, leveraging and working on things you've probably seen if you peruse LinkedIn. The Army's coming up with a program to have potential some long-range, like gliders that come out of the back of a cargo airplane to protect the aircraft but can deliver assets long distance. That's going to be incredibly important. Think about personnel recovery, right? We've relied on that golden hour for so long. Well, if we can't get aircraft in to recover people in that golden hour, we have to rely on prolonged care. If we can't get aircraft in to get them out, how do we get supplies in for that prolonged care, right? So this goes beyond just aircraft. This goes into personnel survivability and other things. So these are all the things we're thinking through. Colonel Blair Byram, Scrappy, the work he's doing on hastening sortie generation is phenomenal. He discovered that the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron out at Nellis, stood up 2 years ago, is tasked with accelerating sortie generation on the ground. It's like the 522 test for aircraft at Nellis, but they're actually doing work on the ground. Many of us didn't know that, but they can only do 1 aircraft at a time. What if they could do 2 fighters and a bomber, if they were resourced to do that? Something to think about, and knit them into the larger ecosystem of innovation development all the way up through the organizations AFMC is standing up, and then accelerating ICTs. And then, of course, such a big part of sortie generation is aviation support equipment. And that's when we brought in Colonel Jen Bernard, who's leading that effort for AFMC. Asset availability, Mark Clore, AFMC A10, is a perfect person to lead that. You can see some of the initiatives there, from harnessing the supply sprints AFMC is doing to looking at RSP posture. 30 days, is that enough? Should it be 60? 15 days with the unit, 45 standoff. I'm making this up, don't hold me to this. Engine WRE is 30 days enough, considering how long it takes to get parts and how long it takes to produce engines. All the things the teams will consider moving forward as we talk about developing a novel concept of operation under the worst case scenario. I'd argue that the concept of, concept of support will not look like anything that we've done before. As we were island hopping in World War II, we were contested, but not at the range and speed we're being contested today. Potentially, we may be contested on getting things to the fight, and potentially the things that are there are subject to destruction. So how do we do that? How do we get to the fight and sustain the fight until we can create the kind of permissibility we need to have the standing support that we normally have? That's what an OPT that the A4 has been tasked to stood up, that everyone will be a part of, is going to tackle shortly after LOA, is developing that new concept of support. And that concept of support will then determine, what do we do in terms of OI and D level maintenance, right? FMC, AFSC, the MAGCOMs, everyone will be involved in that. So then it may determine the unit of action where, what levels of backshop support there will be, and where and how they may be aligned within the mission force generation element. So you can see when you ask, hey, what's the unit of action going to look like? Well, we don't know yet. We truly need to look at function as we go out and develop form. So some of the path that we're down, and then production capacity. You can't talk production without talking the Air Force Sustainment Center, and that's where Colonel Ken Fetters and his team, with Colonel Frymuth out of the ALC, under General Hawkins' leadership and guidance, are tackling that for us. You can see some of the activities there. So hopefully I'm not running over. I've saved some time for questions. Next slide, please. So bottom line is, I think we're better served by thinking of contested operations with logistics implications from the start, and thinking about how we plan, innovate, fund, and operate that way. And when we begin to think of it that way, we'll do a better job of identifying and closing gaps. Giving you a model, giving you some thoughts, giving you some ways that we are looking at it through GPC, the BLES, contested logistics campaigning, specifically Conlog OPT. Hopefully you have a sense of what the Air Force is doing and how we're going to roll into with our sister services in the Joint Force. A wicked problem, but we're well equipped. With your bright mind, we're leveraging academia, we have industry, and we have one thing that the adversary doesn't have: partners and allies. We've got friends, so we don't have to solve this problem together. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Good morning, sir. What are we doing to reduce our reliance on commercial transportation, since UPS, DHL, and other companies likely aren't going to get into contested environments?
I can barely see Major General Dave Sanford out there, and I'm sure he's going, ooh, ooh. So, a great question. Do we want to reduce our reliance on commercial transportation, or do we want to focus them on permissive environment and free up gray tails, black bottom boats, and others for non-permissive? And I'm asking because I am not a global mobility expert. Dave Sanford is. I'd argue that there's a place out there, and we probably need to have more than less. If you look at the mobility readiness capability study, or did I get a couple of those words backwards? Pretty close. There's an insatiable demand for transportation requirement. And we keep using that word efficiency, and we've got to get smaller, lighter footprints. Okay, yes, from the transportation and financial standpoint, but in terms of attrition, how do we handle and manage that? So I'd argue we'd be better served by saying, do we need a -60 powered cart, or do we need a -20 that helps us generate sorties and give us just what we need to do on a rock, and have 8 of those on a pallet instead of 1 pallet position for 2? Can we reduce our transportation requirement so we can fit in with what we have and maybe demand less commercial transportation, but maybe target the use of those that allows them to permit in spaces that's more comfortable to them? Now, are we always subject to strikes? Yes. Now, in Warden's ring theory, you saw population, and you go, well, how does population affect? Well, I mean, look at COVID, right? I happened to be at PAC FA4 at the time. COVID hit there first, and they said, treat this like a hurricane. And so what did everybody do? They ran out and got water and toilet paper. This is true. And then the videos hit, and they hit the CONUS, and everybody ran out and got water and toilet paper. This is COVID, right? We're probably not going to lose water. And I'm not sure about toilet paper, but the point is, if people get a vote in Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? If people are worried about protecting their family or something else, We could lose essential workers. So transportation is an issue, which is why pre-positioning is so important and other things. We've got to think through, invest, and get our initial assets where they need to be. As we work this concept of support, I don't know that we can rely on having everything we want and get it with us exactly when we need it. So it's just something we need to consider. Like I said, I don't have all the answers, but the people that General Miller and his team will gather will hopefully arrive at them. And again, it should be data-driven and risk-informed. We're going to use models like C-SPEC and probably some partners to help us with the analytics. Not a direct answer, but I hope it helps. Please, next question.
Okay, one final question. To develop the airmen we need, we must also be the Air Force they deserve. What is your assessment of our current logistics culture and what needs to change to better support our airmen?
Oh, wow. So, you know, that's a great question. As we work through the BLES, Basic Logistics Enterprise Strategy, LOE2 is developing resilient airmen, and we're looking at that now. So there are a bunch of Air Force programs out there to make sure that we've got, that we're creating an Air Force in which every airman can reach their full potential, right? And the commanders programs, and so what we're looking at in the BLES is, should we focus on those things within our career fields that are unique, really unique? Like several years ago, the Air Force made the decision to do away with suicide training for defenders and intel and maintenance. And so now we probably owe it to go look at the numbers and say, okay, do we have a gap there? To continue to do, bright lights. Our analysis, guys help me, our gap analysis on barrier analysis, thank you, so sorry. Our barrier analysis along multiple fronts and say, what does that look like, right? But it's not just logistics, it's big Air Force, right? I know there's two things we're looking at is how do we open up to get more folks in, like, dress and grooming standards, Native Americans, long hair, that's a barrier, right? It is, and so it's something we need to consider with societal shifts, and we've done very well along those lines, and we need to consider our joint forces and moving together as a department, and we're doing good along those forms. Another one is driver's license. Believe it or not, fewer and fewer young Americans are getting driver's license, and a lot of our career fields require that. So do we waive that requirement and get them in, and then figure out what to do with them? So our CFMs are now wrestling with that challenge too. Some do we hold fast, realizing we're going to have harder times meeting our requirement quotas. So a lot of things that we're wrestling with. But I'd argue that with all things, it starts with leadership. It starts with us. It starts with treating people like people, finding out what it is they need, being open, getting feedback, and saying, hey, what's it like working here? What can we do to help? Being open to new ideas. This culture of innovation is fantastic until the first time they hear no, right? I'd much rather give the answer of yes if, right? Hey, yes, that's a great idea. Let's see if someone will support it. Let's take a little time, package together, and yeet it up the chain and see what's going on. And our goal right now is to develop more pipelines that will allow people to do that. Spoke with General Hawkins a couple of days ago, and he said, hey, let's develop a path. So if the MAJCOMs identify something that could potentially be made additively, that we bring it into the sustainment center, evaluate it, get it to the program offices, allow them with their OSS&E to determine, can they make a decision, or does it need to go to Airworthiness Authority, right? Make that an easy process or path, and then bring people along. So if we want to have a culture of innovation, if we want to have a culture of inclusiveness, it starts with leadership opening those doors. And like I said, go left to bang and create processes that make that easy. So I hope that's helpful. I've seen us come a long way in the last 30 years. And again, it starts with us. It starts with open minds, officers and senior NCO leading the way, speaking truth to power and championing our young men and women and what's important to them, right? Professionally, always.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much.